The time is at hand.
The elusive dog-like creature attacks livestock, bleeding them dry of blood.
8 to 10 feet tall, shadowy aliens.
But I am telling you right now,
we need a great reset.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen.
From 659 feet upon a very windy Appalachian mountain point, you are in dark places. I'm your Huckleberry, Jumbo Fugit. I hope that you survived the satanic ritual performed at the Super Bowl. I can't really think of anything to complain about this week, so let's just jump right into the news. A woman in Argentina has gone viral on social media in the country after she posted a video wherein she claims to have spotted a goblin while she was out on a walk by Timbanal. The very weird account reportedly came to light earlier this month when Vicky Nata took to TikTok to share a truly fantastic experience that she had the previous day in the city of Bariloche. According to her, she was strolling down a street while watching videos on her phone when she suddenly noticed someone beside her. The mysterious individual, Nata said, was rather diminutive and sported white hair and a beard to match. Certain that what she saw was a goblin, or a duende, as it is known in Latin America, Nata insisted that she was telling the truth about her sighting, and mused that she had previously not believed in such entities, but now she is certain that they are real. The awestruck witness went on to recall how, in the moment, she was not scared of the small stranger, and instead simply told herself that he was being playful by appearing before her. Nata's video spread like wildfire on social media in Argentina, with some viewers dismissing Nata's account as merely a tall tale on her part, while others responded that they had also seen such entities in the area. This week on the show, I'm not going to be talking about gnomes or duendes, sadly, but I will be reading some super spooky Dogman encounters. Some people call it a werewolf. I call it a Dogman. You know, that seems kind of more popular these days. I used to call it a werewolf. I remember right around the time the Howling movie came out that I sort of remember kind of maybe seeing a Dogman or having a dream about a Dogman or something to that effect. By thinking I saw a dog-like creature standing upright wearing a red flannel shirt walking out the back door of my house. Right around the same time period as I saw the shapeshifter guy in the living room of that house. Maybe they're connected. Maybe I was dreaming about the Dogman, I don't know. There's this story you'll hear in South Central Tennessee about the Whistling Patty. It was just a story that a friend told me because his father swore he saw it when he was younger. Well, I'm with a couple of friends at a cabin and I had work in the morning, so I left around midnight. I topped a hill on the road and I saw this thing that was like a fox or a coyote, but standing on two legs. It was a grayish white color, and it stood about 3 feet taller than the speed limit sign, and it had bright green eyes. I immediately called one of my friends, still at the cabin, in a panic, and he kept saying I'm drunk and to just go home. Note, I hadn't consumed any alcohol, and I'm not one to try things that mess with my mind, so no drugs were involved. After about 5 minutes of me trying to explain what to say on the phone, I gave up and hung up. I got home about 15 minutes later, and I get a call. It's the cabin friend. He stated that they were leaving because they heard a noise that they had never heard before after we hung up. They went outside and heard it again, but closer. When I asked him to explain the noise, he said it wasn't possible to mimic. It was a high screech, but not a normal sound. But now, they believe me, and no one else believes us. The date was June or July 1992, around 5 p.m. in southern Maryland. It was evening, and my family and I were coming back from Chesapeake Beach, Maryland, from having dinner with my brother, mom, and dad. I was 15 to 16 and in the back right passenger seat, chilling with my brother, riding along, just looking out the window, and there is a little road that merges onto the main road on the left. So as we merge, we pick up a little speed. We are going maybe 25 to 30 miles per hour, and you have to cross this little bridge, and it's really bumpy. So we slowed down even more. Once we did that, I looked up ahead, about 75 yards ahead. I see something standing on the wood edge off to the right a little. But it was exactly at the edge of the woods. It had both arms on a tree, just standing there, meaning its right arm was on a tree about shoulder height, and its left arm was on a tree at about shoulder height. So its arms were basically spread out with its hands on the trees. It was about 7 feet tall, maybe even taller. Had a wolf-looking face, only larger than a dire wolf from Game of Thrones. Really broad shoulders, muscular arms, a barrel chest, and it narrowed the rest of the way down. It was dark brown, and the hair was medium length. I didn't get a great look at the legs because it locked eyes with me. It knew I saw it, and it saw me. I saw it a good distance up ahead and was like, "What is that standing on the wood edge?" And as soon as I said that, I locked eyes with it. I saw it for a good 10 to 15 seconds because of how far up ahead it was. I first noticed it moving around and how slow we were traveling. It took my breath when I first realized what I was looking at, and my first thought was, man, that thing's ugly. It had very pointy features, and it didn't look like a Bigfoot, but an actual werewolf. A lot of people call it a Dogman, but I'm more inclined to say that it was an actual wolf man. I said it out loud to my family. "Did you guys see that thing?" Obviously, they were like, "See what?" Another thing, this was in southern Maryland, where there are no bears or other large animals. I live in the northwestern side of Michigan. I was 9 years old when this happened. At that point, I still shared my room with my sister, and so my bed was on one wall with a big window on the opposite side. My sister's bed was right underneath the window. We were on the first floor of the house, but we live on a hill, so it's slanted, and so it's still a pretty high window, about 9 feet off the ground maybe. Anyway, I woke up one Saturday night feeling thirsty. It was about 2 in the morning, and everyone else in my family was asleep. I was about to crawl out of my bed to go to the bathroom just down the hall when I looked at the window and froze. At the very bottom of the window, there was a really dark shape. It looked kind of like the top part of a Siberian husky's head. It was a big thing, with 2 points that looked like ears on the top. I couldn't make out any other features, so while I was still scared, at first I just thought it was a reflection of the pillows at the end of my sister's bed. And then it moved. You know how dogs kind of twitch their ears and perk them up when they're trying to hear you better? That's what this shape did. The 2 points that I took for ears twitched and then came back into place, and it wasn't a subtle movement at all. So I knew it wasn't just a reflection. The Dogman story is really big here, and we live right in the woods, so I immediately thought of that. I got really scared then, so I did the typical kid thing and pulled the covers over my head and went back to sleep without getting my water. And that always works, by the way. Just cover up your head. Make sure you don't have any hands or feet hanging out of the blanket either. Words of wisdom to live by. In the morning, there was nothing outside the window, and no marks on the outside of the house or anything. No evidence that there had been something there at all. The thing that really stumps me is wondering how anything would manage to stay up by a window that's 9 feet off the ground in the first place. Since I was 9, I do accept that it was possible that I just imagined it. I already knew the Dogman story, so maybe I was just scared to begin with. And that fear kind of manifested itself like that. No, we're not going with that. It was a Dogman. At the same time, I really do believe that there was something outside the window, Dogman or not. I'm going to say that this was a Dogman changing to human form. Can they do that? I don't know. I was about 16 and leaving my girlfriends to head home. This is a very rural backroads area. I can still see it as if it was yesterday. I was on a back road and coming up to a little hill in the road where deer usually cross. I kind of slowed down for that reason, and from the woods and left ditch crawled out a dude on his hands and knees in just like some dirty looking whitey-tighties. He crawled halfway across, and as he got halfway, his head turned. His long greasy hair fell aside, and he looked right at me, maybe 15 feet in front of my lights, then continued to crawl. I got out of there. I don't know if I whimpered or yelled, but it scared me to death. I told a lot of people, and everyone laughed, except for one guy who said, "You mean the hill by the shack?" I about crapped. I flew out there the next chance I got, and sure enough, there is this roof sticking out of the trees, maybe about 100 yards in. I guess they were a group of super old migrant field worker shacks. Not positive, because it was before my time. But that's what I was told. I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was changed by what I believe was a cryptid called a Dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear. A bear cannot move how it did. And it was not a normal wolf, as they can't comfortably run on 2 legs. Whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing. This happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old, and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in northwestern Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in a cabin, or at least by the bonfire, by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always feel like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day, the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy. That is, until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 12 and 2 o'clock in the day. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo. He was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 20 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point, and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me when I decided to mess with him. I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze, and then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right. When I saw it, its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, but it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs, crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go, and the next thing I know, he is sprinting, and I look back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours. It charged us and sounded right on us, barreling through the bushes, but for whatever reason, it let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 feet tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws, it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now, I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know, they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman. This happened when I was much younger. I'd have to ask my parents when the camping trip happened to tell you how many years ago it was, but I can assure you it was at least 16 years ago. Around that time, a friend from church asked me to join his family on a camping trip to a wilderness reserve called Oasis State Park. Of course, since this was my best friend and his family had always been nice, I said yes. Up until that point, I had only camped rarely, so the prospect of camping with a friend and his family seemed absolutely amazing. So we began preparing for a weekend when I wasn't busy. I got my own tent, my own sleeping bag, and my own supplies. Once all that was gathered, the father of my friend came and picked me up, and my parents waved me off. There are quite a few things I remember from that trip. The amazingly hostile, yet beautiful New Mexico countryside, the plateaus, and the campsite. The New Mexican wilderness isn't something a lot of people fantasize about camping in, at least not so far as I know of, but Oasis State Park is different. The camping plots are all nice, even if the best are always taken. There's a pretty lake, lots of wildlife, and I hate to admit, more trees than I've ever seen in town. Yeah, I know nobody thinks of multitudes of trees when they think of New Mexico, and for good reason. They aren't the most common occurrence in the plains unless planted by people. Regardless, Oasis has enough for me to just use the term woods for the sake of brevity. So anyway, we found ourselves a plot and began setting up our tents. By afternoon the tents were set, and me and my friend ditched his oh-so-boring younger sister in favor of exploring the park. The memories are fantastic. We found a snake by the lake and watched it drink water before slithering off quickly. We explored a place I remember was very sandy. We watched a roadrunner doing its thing. We played all day after lunch and saw so many amazing things that by the end of the day, I would have never thought anything could go wrong. We finished the day like you always do, by collecting sticks and starting a fire to eat s'mores and tell ghost stories. None of the stories were scary. Probably because me and my friend were kids and his sister was an even younger child. That and his father was lead singer at our church, and making children cry was bad for reputation. So by ghost stories, I mean little jokes of stories designed to make us giggle more than cry. Yeah, it was lame, but what do you expect? Anyway, shortly after the stories were said and s'mores were eaten, we retired. Me to my tent, and my friend, his father, and sister to their tent. Now for this setup, I'll explain positioning. This is all going to be important. My tent was on one edge of the plot, and my friend's tent was at the opposite. This was for privacy reasons. Now at my end of the plot was a mini trail that led through thick brush to the lake. Also about 3 feet from my tent was a little tree. I don't know what kind of tree it was, but it was still young and small. The trail to the lake was to the left of my tent entrance. The lake was behind it, and a thin tree line sat across a trail in front of my tent. That trail in front of my tent led to the bathrooms. So I went to bed without a single bit of fear, and before I did, I went ahead and urinated on the tree outside my tent because of laziness. 2-minute walk to the bathroom, when nature's toilet was just outside my tent. So I finished closing up my tent for the night and climbed into my sleeping bag to go to bed. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke, I had to use the bathroom, and it wasn't the kind of pottying I could do on a tree, or at least not reasonably. So I, not being a moron who would wander through the dark, grabbed my little lantern. I flipped on my LED lantern, and I unzipped the inner flap of my tent before the outer, as if that little nylon net could protect me from what I was about to see. Now I should mention that outside of cities, in New Mexico, it's quite common to hear coyote howls. It's a nightly occurrence when camping. Heck, even up in a little village like Logan, you can hear the howls from your bedroom. It isn't so unnerving when you're in a house, but when you got some flimsy nylon walls to protect you, and that's it, well, it isn't the most comforting sound. As I unzipped my tent flap, I did hear a few howls, but they were distant and not worrying. What stunned me into stillness was a very loud howl from the direction of the lake, about a yard from my tent at most. This howl was different, though. It had the feel of a coyote howl, but it was deeper, and it lasted longer. I simply sat there petrified at what I heard. I wouldn't be able to guess how long I sat there, breathing hard with my fingers still grasping the zipper, but however long it may have been was just long enough for the thing that made the howl to come up the trail next to my tent. Suddenly I heard the crunching of claws on dirt, and after that, claws on the rocks that made our camping plots. Then I saw the largest shadow made by a living creature that little kid me had ever seen. It lumbered heavily in the direction of the sparse tree line, where I assumed the other howling had come from. But before it got past the tree where I urinated, it stopped. I realized only then that I was both lit like a candle and had not been trying to silence my heavy breathing. By then, it was too late, as the hulking thing lumbered over closer to the tree and into the light of my lantern. As dim as the little LED light was at that distance, it was just barely enough to make out details. I'd like to take note a very few important details that stuck out to me as odd. It had roughly the fur coloring of a coyote, but that classic Dogman head shape, with the tiny pointed ears too small to make sense. It also made strange noises as it lowered to all fours in front of my tent. Popping sounds like joints rubbing together, as I can only assume its knees busted out of their standing joints and fell into different joints to support all fours. It briefly ignored the very obvious frightening kid me in the tent as it sniffed the tree where I had urinated. The breasts were similar to a dog's, but longer and far deeper, almost like a horse's. Then that thing turned to me and stared straight into my eyes. Its eyes didn't glow, They didn't peer into my soul, but they were unbelievably unnatural. Above all the things I saw in those eyes, I saw a predator. Have you ever been in a position where you made eye contact with a beast you know is stronger than you? Something you know could just slaughter you, and you know that it knows you know? Just looking for seemingly so long that I thought for sure I'd just be a bloody stain by the time anyone reached my tent. Screaming would do nothing. I doubted a gun would even hurt this thing. But despite every feeling in my gut, despite the dread of knowing it was a predator and I was prey, I didn't die. Instead, it turned slowly, ever so slowly, and just sprinted off into the woods. Just gone into the night, faster than it came. I have one personal friend who knows, and he jokes that it made me pee on the tree, like I marked my territory, or some dumb thing like that. Or maybe it just wasn't hungry. Or, most improbable, it had just enough morals to not kill a kid. I'll never really know. Needless to say, I didn't go to the bathroom. I just put my lantern away, closed my tent flap, and held it all night. I don't remember sleeping that night. I might have, I might not. But if I did, it was dreamless. I do remember that I tried to hide this experience the next day, asking if my friend and his family heard any howling. While they said they did hear howling, they told me that they just ignored it, thinking it was a coyote doing coyote stuff. I was encouraged to just ignore it, as if I was a city kid who had never heard a coyote howling before. That next day, I stayed as close to my friend as possible while exploring, and had nearly forgotten the encounter by lunch. Somehow, the safety I had been feeling during the day put the beast out of my mind, until we found tracks in that super sandy place. Coyote tracks. I think seeing those tracks confirmed to me that it wasn't just some dream, and because of that, I showed enough fear that night to convince my friend's family to let me sleep in their tent, even in the comfort of a warmer tent. More people means more warmth. And in the presence of an adult, the father, and two other people, my friend and his sister, I couldn't sleep that night. I'd nearly drift into sleep, and then I'd hear a coyote howl. The next day I pretended to be sick and got my mother to drive up and take me home a day or two early. Worst camping trip of my life. It ruined not only my whole summer, but also ruined camping. I haven't been camping without a tent buddy since, and I don't plan to. Even then, I'm never comfortable, always listening for strange noises and acting paranoid. This really messed me up, I guess, being forced to see that a human, top of the food chain, is utterly powerless in front of such a beast. Seriously, I don't think I can press hard enough to make everyone realize how powerless I felt. Even today, when I think about this, I remember two things: those eyes and that feeling. Just writing this sent multiple shivers up my spine. And with that, we are woefully out of time this week. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again right here next week. God bless.